So there's nobody doing things the way we are doing it. I think that there's lots of business support organizations. I think that there are quite a number of, technology startups and technology companies raising millions and millions of dollars. But I think that the edge that we have, right, is that we're building for need.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Kristin Wilson, founder and strategy lead at Spurt. How you doing today, Kristin?
I'm doing great, Andrew. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thanks for spending some time with us on Business Ninjas. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and about Spurt.
Awesome. So I'm Kristin, West African descent, mixed West African descent. Spent a lot of my early life, exploring different parts of the world, different continents. Thought I would become a doctor, and then at some point figured that I perhaps could have more impact looking, I guess, more wide scale impact looking at entrepreneurship as a way to get people to prosperity. So maybe I took capitalism a bit more seriously than I should have, who knows? But I do think, while I'm sort of agnostic on capitalism as an effective economic system, I definitely still do believe that entrepreneurship and sort of like enabling entrepreneurship can create pathways for prosperity for people, particularly in emerging markets. And that's essentially the mission that we have at Spurt, is to empower entrepreneurs so that they can build more strategic businesses, more productive businesses, and more profitable businesses. And so the company is structured for us to be able to do that. And I would say that we operate the business around these levers, right? So we've got different arms of the company, one of which is focused on strategy, another that's focused on technology, another that's focused on storytelling, and so on and so forth. So really just trying to think intentionally about what is it that an entrepreneur needs to thrive, and how can we facilitate that, particularly for that emerging market context.
Excellent. What a beautiful pathway. Instead of helping one person at a time in front of you through healthcare, you're trying to,
That's the hope, or maybe that's what I tell myself so I sleep well at night. Who knows?
I don't know. I don't know if you sleep well, but we'll...
I do not sleep well. So exactly. So, yeah.
And what's the origin story? When did Spurt come to be?
So, it's like so nebulous in the sense that I think Spurt has always, well, not has always, but has existed in some form since maybe like 2016, in the sense that maybe it didn't exist as like a corporate entity, but the mission of it, the principle of it, and certainly some activities that my co-founder and I were doing, we were doing as early as 2016, so working with entrepreneurs, working with companies. But I think in real terms, maybe sometime 2019 was when we started to think about, well, some sort of formalization. We started to more intentionally aggregate the data and the insights from the work we were doing, and we started to think about, well, how do we build an institution around this? How do we create the sort of infrastructure that allows this to exist beyond us and beyond our best intentions, into something that other people can participate in and other people can carry forward. So we eventually actually incorporated the company in 2021. Okay. But I would say that from about 2020, we hired one person, through an internship program that we launched, because we were also very interested in this question of sort of like human capital development. So both my co-founder and I, we were quite lucky. We had really good education. We actually met because we found out we were living in the same city and we were both going to go to Princeton, and we developed a strong relationship while we were at uni. She then went on and did really interesting things, is, right now working on a PhD back at Princeton. I also got really lucky and, have been able to have a pretty good education. That's also then translated into what I've ended up
I'm
doing.
sorry to laugh, but I've seen your educational resume, and to refer to it as pretty good sets the bar pretty high for any other institutions. Anyway.
But you get it, right? There's a lot of privilege in the education that also then translates into privilege of opportunity, the skills that you have, the doors that open for you. And, we just kept thinking that it wouldn't be enough for us to just work on enabling entrepreneurs, that the talent side of the equation needed to be thought about quite intentionally. So one of the commitments that we made about the business was that we would always train young talent so that they could actually, take on roles. Because, there's lots of issues that entrepreneurs face in any market. And certainly in emerging markets, finance is one of them. Maybe sort of issues around governance and sort of public sector issues are also a big one. But the real big one, which really surprises people, the biggest issue is actually talent, the quality of the talent, right? So the talent is really not great. If you want to outsource and find better talent, you can't afford it because you don't have money. So we thought, if you really want to solve this problem in a sustainable way, then yes, help with strategy, yes, help with technology, yes, help with storytelling, but also definitely help with talent. And so those are essentially like the two levers I would say that we wanted to pull at the same time, was this kind of like entrepreneurship and human capital development, and sort of pull both levers at the same time to create prosperity. And so that's, I guess, the origin story for Spurt. And so I guess our official birthday is sometime in, I want to say, July 2021. But yeah, it's been around.
And in terms of lifting up emerging markets, what countries, what portions of the continent are we focusing on?
Yeah, so we're big on Africa because we're both African. And I think one thing that deeply frustrated both of us was how many people, tended to speak about what they didn't know. And so we decided that we would address what we knew first, right? So now I think our work has spanned out, and we are doing a bit broader work that isn't just limited to the continent. But I would say that our core focus is the continent. We've done work in, a fair share. So, east, south, west, not very much north. I would say that our primary markets right now are Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, but also quite a bit of work in Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal as well. So we've got pretty good spread, maybe about 15 countries on the continent, and then a few outside of the continent that we've worked with as well. But that's the main focus. And I think the vision for us as a company, I often say that I want to do essentially what Microsoft did, in the sense that if you think about the world before Microsoft, this idea of running a business and having infrastructure, very basic infrastructure for running a business didn't quite exist. And of course, now there's other players in the game, right? But Microsoft is really quite global. The tools that they provide are so fundamental. You're using a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, it's just a PowerPoint, so we basically want to create that kind of infrastructure and create those kind of frameworks, but more applicable to that emerging market context, right?
It's amazing to me that in 2023, we still have to have these conversations about the countries we're talking about, that some basic, clean running water, electricity, the internet, that these things are not in place, that we have still left that part of the planet, not to be too odd, but most societies and religions consider Africa to be the birthplace of humanity. And here we are talking about how it is left a century behind us. And it's frustrating to know that people have to do what you're doing now.
You know what I found interesting? So I lived in America a fair bit of my life, and one of the things I always do when I live somewhere is I try to travel as much as possible. And I think it was shocking for me actually to see how much once you left some of these economic centers and these economic powerhouses like New York or LA, or that actually America is quite rural, right?
Oh,
And
very.
there's parts of America that, you know, I actually resonated with. You know, I was in parts of Mississippi and Arkansas and, you know, in South Carolina. And I thought, you know, this feels like home, right? In terms of like the lack, in terms of the lack of infrastructure and all of that. And so I think the issue is there's definitely, I think the continent, the African continent, bears the brunt of this kind of like inequality and disenfranchisement. But I think there's a general issue with resource distribution, right? I think that one way or another, we've created a world where the people who have more get more, and the people who have less get less, right? And there's almost even sometimes a moral component to it, right? It's like it's just desserts. And so I think it's like part of the work that we have to do as a society, and I think part of why we're where we are, and like you said, why people are still on the continent concerned about water, electricity, internet, is just this idea that well, if you are wealthy, you're doing something right. There's something morally upright about you. And if you're poor, you're doing something wrong. And there's some sort of moral deficit that you have to first fix. And then, you know, you'll get the, and part of, I think, why we exist as an institution is to kind of like push back against that, but not necessarily, I would say, in a political way, or in a directly political way, but more of, I think our activism is economic, right? So we want to use the tools that we have, the access that we have, the resources that we have, and again, our connection to more wealthy parts of the world to be able to sort of like participate in that redistribution, right? So for instance, very, very early on, a huge part of our model was actually inviting people from other parts of the world who had extra time to donate, to basically work as consultants on the projects, right? So we say a business is trying to figure out, you know, how to optimize their production process. We would put out a call within our networks to folks in the US or in the UK who had done this kind of like, you know, supply chain work or value chain analysis work. Maybe they're working at fancier companies, they're earning really well, but they're thinking, oh, how can I contribute? What can I do? And sometimes contribution isn't about, you know, I don't know, flying to the continent and digging a borehole and taking a picture with an orphan, right? Sometimes it's actually, it's dedicating your expertise, right? It's empowering somebody to be able to feed their family and build their business. And so actually, honestly, a big part of the work that we did, especially between 2016 and 2020, was really just mobilizing not just diaspora, but people that were living outside of the continent and had resources and time and expertise to be able to donate that time at a fraction of the cost. Because the truth of the matter is, like, say you wanted to hire a technology strategist, it would run you tens of thousands of dollars. But because they were interested in donating their time, they would say, oh, I don't need anything for this. You can give me, you know, $50 for a cup of coffee or whatever, right? The company can afford that. It doesn't feel like charity because they're paying something for it that means a lot to them. But you know that you're giving something that, you know, at your job, you're compensated substantially more for. And so that was, you know, the principle of the thing. And so that framework that we created, we called it the consultant pool, the talent pool, and we still operate. So right now we have about maybe about 900 people in our talent pool from all over the world. So that's something that we're certainly very, very proud of. And it is exciting to me that people continue to be willing to donate their expertise and, you know, to sort of help businesses, especially those businesses that are not always able to, you know, pay full price for such services.
That's excellent. It's excellent to know that people want to give back at that level and that many people are stepping up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about the 4 different projects that come under the umbrella of Spurt and how you implement each of them and
For
what the
sure, for sure. Yeah. So the talent pool that I've been talking about is basically under the arm of Spurt that is called Solutions.
Mhm.
And the Solutions arm of Spurt is essentially our strategy and business advisory arm. So this is where we're doing what most people would recognize as kind of like management consulting work,
Okay.
but again, targeted at businesses operating in an emerging market context. So maybe slightly different than the frameworks that would be used in other parts of the world. So solutions is effectively, problem solving, human capital development, operations optimization for small businesses and for startups. And then another arm of the business is something called Made in Africa Brands. We often call it Maiden. And Maiden is really about storytelling. So what we do is we try to amplify the stories of creators who are creating for or on the continent. So this is everything from people that are doing, handicraft work, so clothing, bags, food, as well as people that are creating sort of more technical or digital things. But the idea of Maiden is to essentially create that platform that helps to drive visibility. And something that we also do with Maiden is also that provision of access to grants, because especially for creators, so there's such a huge category, that category called FMCG, fast moving consumer goods. There's such a huge category of people whose income is actually tied to FMCG on the continent. So they make something quickly and try to sell it. And so what we try to do is also create more sustainable and more substantial value chains and distribution lines for them. So whether it's, equipping them so that they can export, connecting them to partners, showing them. So for instance, there's a project that we're taking on right now that's a brand that's creating, so she's basically helping to address rural urban migration and some of the exploitation that happens with that by basically equipping young women that migrate from more rural parts of Ghana and don't necessarily have any skills, so have to take very menial jobs, have to sleep on the streets, and she's teaching them handicraft work, and then she's basically allowing them to go back home, do that handicraft, but then sell their handicraft locally. And part of the things that we want to actually help her do is to work on the exportation of that handicraft so that they can actually generate a bit more revenue and have a more substantial impact. So, and that work, I mean, it takes so many players. It's the introductions, it's the donations, it's multifaceted. And so that's really fundamentally what Maiden, as an arm of the business is sort of focused on. And then another arm of the business is called Paperclip. And Paperclip is really about just, keeping things tight. So Paperclip is focused on editing, business writing, translating. One of the things that I learned very, very quickly, so there's a term in Nigeria, it's called packaging, or the other term is wash, which is basically the idea that how something looks can often be more important than how good something is, right? And very, very often we see that people lose opportunities because they don't have the right packaging, they don't have the right wash, right? So you walk into a room and it's like, oh, I'm a Princeton alumni, and suddenly what you have to say is more interesting than somebody who perhaps even knows a lot more about it than you do, right? Or you speak with a certain accent versus not. And so what we do with paperclip editing is try to sort of like correct for that a bit and help, entrepreneurs and actors that are doing really important work to basically present a stronger version of what it is that they're doing, and basically have that right packaging so that they can be taken as seriously as they ought to be. And sometimes even that means putting them under our brand to present them, if that gives them a little bit more credibility and if that gives them an opportunity to get into the door. I sense that you had a question.
No, I was just going to say that, perception is a very important word, right? I live in Los Angeles, which is a town of perception more than substance. And I completely understand where you're going with that. There are very substantive people in this world who don't necessarily present from across the room in a way that is consumable by people who need to invest their time, energy, So
Yeah.
I completely understand the goal of Paperclip.
Yeah, and it really is a real issue. But the thing is, I mean, one thing I think when I was really young, I was very frustrated by this, right? But the older I've gotten, it's that, people are so overwhelmed that we use those shorthands, right? Does it look good? Does it make me feel excited? It might seem shallow, but it's also efficient, right? And so it's like, okay, how do you help folks sort of surmount that hurdle? And so then the last arm of our business, which is arguably the largest arm of our business, is a technology arm. So there we build both custom and generic tools for businesses. So like I said, where our two levers are this kind of like entrepreneurship and human capital development. And so our tools are sort of similarly designed. So we've got a project management tool, then we've got a performance management tool, employee happiness tool, and a sort of like recruitment tool. But they're designed in a way that, one, they're extremely adaptable. So they work for small organizations as well as for large organizations, because there's a high level of customization that we enable. Our pricing is adaptive as well. So, if you think back to when sort of like sliding scale pricing, so that's a similar approach that we use. And so the idea for us is, as we continue to develop those products, is, to think about things like zero rating the tool, so that you're able to use it whether or not you can pay for internet access, and so on and so forth, making sure that we're building, for instance, progressive web applications rather than, applications that you need to install on your phone, because people who have less money can't afford very fancy phones, which means that their phones have limited memory. So if your app is another thing that they have to install on their phone to be able to use, then that's a bit of a burden on them. So it's all of those sorts of things. And so that technology arm just puts a tool that's efficient, that meets global standards in the hands of entrepreneurs, works well for folks who have high bandwidth and, a great device, but also works really well for people who have low bandwidth and a pretty crappy device. And so, operating along those different arms, we're trying to sort of like, company by company, entrepreneur by entrepreneur, really pull businesses and pull people forward.
That's an honorable endeavor. It sounds like you are removing many obstacles and impediments to put people who have the resources and wherewithal to help together with the people who need it. So
that's the idea, right? Distribution.
Yeah. I typically ask, what makes you stand out from your competition? Are there others in this space trying to do what you're doing?
So there's nobody doing things the way we are doing it. I think that there's lots of business support organizations. I think that there are quite a number of, technology startups and technology companies raising millions and millions of dollars. But I think that the edge that we have, right, is that we're building for need, right?
Mhm.
So I think that one thing that we've seen that differentiates us and allows us to have real impact, real stories of impact, is that we're actually paying attention to the needs of the market, and we're addressing that need as a way to sort of like to scale and to grow. What it means is that, coming back to this perception question, is perhaps we don't get noticed as quickly. But I think that it does mean quite a bit for our longevity, because when we work with people, they stick with us, they come back to us, they trust what we have to share. And there's a way in which it's not faddish, right? This idea there, we're not just the latest app in town, we're not the latest fintech in town, we're actually a growth partner for their businesses. And I think it means something when somebody's using your product, but they're calling you like you're their counselor. And they're like, I need a session, like what's going on? You know what I mean? And so for us, that longevity, that impact, I think is what really differentiates us, because I think that we're really building the rails for sustainable prosperity building.
That's excellent. Excellent. And what are the common challenges that you're solving for your clients?
It's so I mean, I think it's people management, right? Um, it's how do you take limited resources and make the most of them? And so for us, we're saying that technology is an extremely powerful tool and that we can put this kind of like business optimization technology, this collaboration technology into the hands of businesses that really do need it. Um, and so you're looking at teams that are struggling with productivity, with, quality of work. You're looking at teams that are struggling with access to financing, teams that are struggling with, what is the right market entry strategy? Should I be in this market versus that other market? I'm doing this, but I think maybe it's not working. I've kind of hit a stalemate. Am I in the right part of the value chain? Should I be moving further down or further up the value chain? I can't seem to attract the right sort of talent to grow my business, but I feel like I'm on something. So what it really is about just solving those day-to-day problems that like entrepreneurs face as they try to build. Because one of the things we see is that globally, moving so to sort of take a bit of a more macro view, that when countries, when continents are moving away from sort of like poverty into prosperity, is that you see actually an increase in the number of family businesses and small businesses that are able to survive over time. Right. So one of the things I always say is that Africa is a continent of a lot of activity, but low productivity, right? And so there's so much going on, right? A very entrepreneurial spirit, but businesses are set up today and they die tomorrow, right? And so part of what we're trying to solve for is looking at places like Asia, like Latin America, and seeing how that trend of prosperity really begins when you see multi-generational family businesses, where you see businesses that live 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, 12 years. That for me is when you actually are creating prosperity, right? Somebody's able to have a job, their child is able to continue in that company, and so on and so forth. So I would say that really comes to the heart of what we want to do, right? Is enable an economy that is sustainable, that enables like sustainable entrepreneurship. And I think that goes beyond VC or PE or any of these things, and really just speaks to real building of wealth and prosperity. Yeah.
All right, hairs are standing up on me. That's all good stuff. It's a time in history where it's very important to tell your story in a multimedia way so that people can have access to your tools, and so that people who want to participate or donate know who you are and that they should join in. How are you getting the story out here in 2023?
So I think I'm like the worst at this. That's the hard part. That's the hard part. We're trying. We have social media channels. I mean, I think maybe about 6 to 8 months ago, we started trying to do this a little bit more better. I mean, we barely had any real intentional presence prior to then. So we're on LinkedIn at as Spurt, and I think we have Twitter, also as Spurt Africa or something, and then Instagram we have handles for each of the arms, and of course we've got our websites. But I think that's where, I mean, speaking transparently and speaking honestly, I think that's where we need to do better. Because coming back to this idea of perception, people need to see you so that they can help, so that they can participate, so that they can contribute, so that they can be challenged as well, right? And so I think that in 2023, as we come together, we operate remotely as a team, but we come together once a year physically and we talk about our goals for the year. And I think one of the things that we said for this year was that we wanted to be more, we wanted to get better. We wanted to learn how to tell our story better and to get our story in front of more people.
As they say, I know a guy who might be able to help you.
That is awesome. I'd like to meet that.
All right. Fast forward a year from today. What's something you'd like to be celebrating personally and professionally?
So I'll tell you. So I'll tell you the short version of this, and well, let me just answer the question. So our goal is to directly impact 1 billion entrepreneurs, right?
Ooh.
As a business, as an organization, we want to have, helped 1 billion entrepreneurs on their journey to sustainable prosperity. So I think for me, a year from now, right? Um, I want to be clear that like we're solidly on that track. I think right now we're still in that building phase. Like I said, we really launched the company in 2021. So we're about 2 years in. So we're still in that startup phase. But I think that in a year, I want to feel like, okay, we're on that trajectory, right? We're in that momentum, and our tool is in the hands of, at least 100,000 people that are, really feeling that impact. So that's how I would frame that, if that makes sense.
It completely does. It is a lofty and beautiful goal. It truly is. To try to help people thrive
Yeah,
and
I mean,
flourish.
Microsoft is helping over 1 billion people, so maybe not so lofty.
Well, it can be done, right? There's a
It
lot of
can
work
be done,
between here and
yeah.
there, but it has been and can be done. So,
Yeah, yeah.
all right. Well, please tell our listeners what your URL is, and I know you have 4 or 5 of them to read off,
Yeah, yeah.
and what social media channels you're using these days. I know we
For
just kind
sure,
of
for
covered
sure.
that, but
So I think to make it simple, I would say that find us on LinkedIn. We are Spurt, SPURT, with an exclamation mark. Sometimes it helps if you put Africa. Sometimes it does make a difference, but Spurt. And then if you want to check out our tools and just see what we're doing, one of the things that we've built is called Sync, and you can find that at www.teamsync.tools, which is TEAMSYNC.tools. And I think that just that tool gives you a sense of what we're trying to accomplish for entrepreneurs. And then you can, follow us on LinkedIn, and I'm sure it'll direct you everywhere else. How good a job did I do with that?
Kristin Wilson of Spurt, thank you so much for spending some time with us on Business Ninjas. Thank you for what you do. Again, your lofty goals are beautiful. You're trying to help people in emerging markets and put them together with the resources in other parts of the world that need to know that they need our help. So I truly appreciate what you do, and thank you for spending some time with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrew. It was good to chat.